A lot of folks just assume that abandoned buildings are cursed, and well, most of the time they're right. How else can you justify the decaying monuments and wasted land? Ghosts and demons, of course. People aren't the best at making everything work the way it should, so often huge buildings and fascinating feats of architecture go unoccupied and unused. It's a shame, but it makes for some wicked stories now, doesn't it? Hello horror heads, and welcome back to the scariest channel on YouTube, Top 5 Scary Videos. I'm your horror host, Keegan Hughes, and today we're going to be taking a look at the top 5 abandoned buildings that are cursed. Before we get started, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe for more scary structures. Perfect, let's get going. Coming in at number 5, we've got the Ground Church Tower. Take one look at this ominous tower poking out of the water and tell me it's not cursed, or filled with treasure, and the treasure's cursed. Sure, it's a church, and churches are places of peace and light, but this one has a tragic story behind it. It was once a lovely place of worship located in South Tyrol, Italy. Folks would come and participate in some pretty average church activities. However, in the 50s, major change was on the horizon. The town needed a new source of energy. In the end, they decided that building an artificial lake would be the way to go. They filled a wide expanse with water and ended up flooding the church. I suppose it was cheaper just to leave some of the buildings as they were instead of demolishing them first. The result is stunning and a little bit ominous. These days, you can see the bell tower peeking out from the top of the water. The rest of the church is down below, wallowing in the murky depths. It sort of feels like a water level in a video game with plenty to explore and frustration abound. I mean, imagine descending into the depths and wading through the many waterlogged chambers hidden below. There could be anything waiting down there. Spirits of wildlife that may have been caught up in the artificial lake. The long lingering ghosts of old churchgoers doomed to float about. It's fascinating and fear-inducing. Coming in at number 4, we've got the Sorrento Abandoned Mill, another Italian cursed building. If you ever visit Naples, you can take a day and head off the beaten path. A canyon nearby is known as the Valley of the Mills and houses all sorts of awesome structures. Ages and ages ago, a flour mill was built. For years it operated, providing flour to the surrounding regions. In fact, it apparently managed to do so for hundreds of years. And if you're at all familiar with the operation of mills before standard safety practices were introduced, you know they were death traps. So for hundreds of years, folks toiled away, grinding out flour and occasionally some workers. Uh-oh. Now, these deaths didn't mean that the mill had to close. It was seen as an occupational hazard of sorts. But then, in the late 19th century, it became isolated from the sea. Tasso Square was built, and this caused the mill to become less practical. Humidity rose in the area, and the mill was forced to shut down. Years later, the building was ultimately closed for good. So we've got a historic mill in a valley closed due to societal progress. Sounds like a recipe for ghosts or a curse to me. If you look at it these days, you'll agree. The mill has been totally overtaken by nature. Greenery has consumed the ancient structure, giving it a foreboding and abandoned look. Moss and lichens cover pretty much every square inch of the walls, essentially daring anyone to come and explore. But be careful if you do, it's hard to tell what might be hidden among the foliage. Maybe a mill worker's ghost missing some essential limbs, or a foreman who lost everything when the grindstones stopped grinding. I hope it was worth it. Progress. Coming in at number 3, we've got the New Bedford Orpheum. Abandoned theaters are cursed as a rule. Like, name one abandoned theater that doesn't have a ghost or urban legend attached. I'll wait. They're magnets for drama. It's in their nature. And this Massachusetts-based art house has a flair for the dramatic like no other. Get this, it opened on the same day that the Titanic went down. Talk about a hot start. It operated for a few decades, showing movies and hosting cultural events. The Orpheum was a staple of local culture at the time. However, in 1958, it closed its doors. Not for good, mind you. It would still open on occasion for extra special events and was even used by a tobacco company as storage for a little while. But these days, the Orpheum is still and silent. Ghostly, even. A peek inside will reveal a gigantic, sprawling space, complete with mezzanine, private boxes, and faded murals. The peeling paint and crumbling plaster add to the spooky ambiance. A total lack of audience for ages makes for an echoey good time, too. It's everything an old theater should be, including the creepiness. It's decrepit without being condemnable, which has led the community to rally behind efforts to reopen it. However, none of these have been very successful. It seems like the curse extends out, hitting the folks who would even attempt to resurrect it. Would you take a seat in the audience, or are you scared of seeing an unscheduled show? Coming in at number 2, we've got the Sathorn Unique Building. A monument to what could have been the Sathorn Unique Building is an interesting case. What was supposed to be a luxurious, high-rise apartment building ended up being an abandoned husk. perfect for urban explorers. Back in the 90s, a magnificent tower was planned. It was to be 47 stories tall with over 600 units, housing all sorts of high rollers in Bangkok. Unfortunately, construction had to stop during the 1997 Asian financial crisis. The building itself was about 80% done, but would never be finished in its entirety. Plenty of money, materials, and man-hours were sunk with nothing to show for it. Well, almost nothing. These days, the Sathorn Unique is known as the Ghost Tower. Thrill seekers and graffiti artists love the sprawling building and have pretty much made it their own. The inside is totally filled with spray-painted murals and other forms of street art. Sure, it's dangerous to go running around in abandoned buildings, but try telling that to any of the folks who do it. Aside from the generally unsavory reputation of street art and urban exploring, why is it known as the Ghost Tower? Well, some locals believe the building was built on the site of an ancient graveyard. This unfortunate placement led to construction delays, accidents, and the eventual abandonment. This story is enough to keep anyone but the bravest out of the Ghost Tower. Another theory is that the building cast shadows on the nearby Wat Yad Nawa, an old Buddhist temple. This, while not being worthy of an outright curse, was considered to be unfavorable. Success is hard to achieve while preventing sunlight from reaching Buddhist temples. Recently, the building has achieved some sort of online fame, with many viral videos featuring folks free-running throughout the tower. This resulted in criminal charges being filed against the trespassing videographers. Is that the result of bad luck or a curse? And finally, at number 1, we've got Eastern State Penitentiary. In East Philadelphia, thrown in a cage, ghosts are coming back because they feel the rage. I'll stop there, you get the idea. At one point, this prison was among the most famous worldwide. It jailed some of America's most prolific criminals, including Al Capone, the inspiration for Scarface, and Slick Willie Sutton, the bank robber extraordinaire. Abandoned prisons are absolutely chock full of phantoms and spirits, and why wouldn't they be? The folks there are probably the most discontent and anger-filled of them all. Eastern State takes full advantage of this too. While the prison itself is no longer operational and houses no inmates, well, no living inmates, they still bring fearless folks around on night tours of the facilities. On clear nights, you can even see moonlight shining through these skylights. In addition to the ghosts of prisoners, it's also said that a colony of cats used to live inside the prison. At some point, they were all captured and neutered, leaving them to die off within the walls. An adept eye might just catch the shadow of a ghost cat slinking about in the halls. Right on. Well, have you updated your travel itinerary? Looking to get lost in some abandoned buildings? Just be careful out there, alright? What'd you think of the list? Have you heard of any of these places before? Had you visited any of them yourself? What's the scariest abandoned building you've ever heard of? Make sure you let me know down in the comments. Speaking of comments, let's take a look at some of your more welcoming ones from the top 5 scary monsters from around the world. Wesley DeJong says, other cultures, terrifying, creative monsters. My culture, here's a banshee, but without the screaming, and we'll just call them white ladies. That's not so bad. Sometimes a quiet scare is a lot more effective than constant noise. Jot Sengson says humans, the worst monsters. They can manipulate you when you look back. Yeah, the scariest beasts tend to be the one that remind us of ourselves now, don't they? Prep for It says, I am a monster fighter, not a lover. That would be gross. Haven't you seen The Shape of Water? Or Nightbreed? Or Hotel Transylvania? Not all monster loving is nasty. I Killed Kenny says, I want a tatzelworm as a pet. Would make a good guard animal, lol. Just make sure you keep it outside. Maybe don't pet it too often. That poison breath doesn't differentiate between you and your enemies, you know. Taya001 says, sorry bro, but I'm not gonna kill the Namazu for a fish fry. I stuck my finger in a catfish tank and the little bugger kissed me instead of biting me. I am now forever off catfish on the menu. You found your familiar. You and catfish now have an inexorable link. Have fun with that. It's just too bad catfish only really live in aquatic environments. Not all that helpful in day-to-day activities. And Feudal Cone says, zoinks. Jaggy, where's Scoob? And that's all the time we have for today. Before I chuck some rocks at an ungrounded oxygen tank, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe for more pertinent places. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. It sort of feels like a water level in a video game with plenty to explore and frustrate. Wow, that's how I react to water levels in video games. Spirits of wildlife that may have been caught up in the ancient spirits. Ages and ages ago, But then in the late 19th century, it became moss and lichens cover every this while not being worthy of out. Speaking of comments, let's have a look at one of your Wesley the